Hi, everyone, and welcome back to The Global Gaze. I'm your host, Dr. SarahJilani, and on this channel, we talk about books, art, and film from an international perspective. So one thing I've been cooking up this year is my second monograph. That's just another word for an academic book. And this book is going to be focused on post-colonial film, hopefully bringing together a wonderful range of African, Asian, and Arab cinemas from the 50s to the present day. So I thought today's video could be a little preview / inspired by this upcoming research. So in this video, I'm going to introduce you to 3 documentaries about the anti-colonial struggle. These documentaries take us from the 1970s to pretty much the present day. When we think about colonialism, we may often think about things like armies, battles, flags, and history books. But there's another battlefield that was just as important: the screen. For peoples who were colonized by European empires throughout the 20th century, cinema became a weapon in itself to resist colonization. You may recall Ousmane Sembène, the great Senegalese director I spoke of in an earlier video. He once said, "Cinema is our night school." And what he meant by that was that for people denied formal education, film could be the realm of the imagination as well as a means of pedagogy. It could teach, awaken, and empower people who are under dire circumstances of occupation and violence. So in the middle of anti-colonial struggles in the 20th century across Africa, Asia, and the Arab world, filmmakers picked up the camera to join in the fight in their own way. And they didn't just want to record the history of struggles, defeats, and victories. They wanted to also write this history from the perspective of the oppressed. And most importantly, their films showed people becoming agents of their own freedom. Now, these 3 aren't all necessarily straightforward documentaries. There are moments of narration within them, but overall, they involved filmmakers grabbing their cameras and embedding themselves within a community to film their everyday life and political struggle as it was. And before we get going, I just want to flag that many of these are not just exciting because they capture histories that are often missing from official textbooks about how people defeated colonialism, but they're also very daring in their cinematic techniques. They give us an idea of the director as something that we're not really used to today. We may think of a director as a kind of lone genius, directing a big group of people on a crowded set and having to handle a very large budget. These 3 documentaries show us a very different understanding of what the filmmaker's role and responsibility towards society may be. In all 3 of these documentaries, their directors are people who actually participate in the struggle that they're filming. They embedded themselves, sometimes at great personal risk, into the communities of their subject matter, often with empathy, curiosity, and political solidarity. So let's get started chronologically. Our first film, 1974, The Hour of Liberation Arrived, was the first film to win an award at Cannes to be directed by an Arab woman. That director was the Lebanese Hani Sroor. Her documentary takes us to the Arab Gulf country of Oman. Sroor's film was shot over the 60s and 70s, and it captured what became known as the Dhofar Rebellion. Although certainly not as well known as some of the main colonies that Britain had, such as India and Nigeria, Oman too was a protectorate of sorts at this time. And it began as a people's uprising. And this wasn't just against the British-backed Sultan, but of course, the wider military apparatus of the British Empire that backed him. Surur and her crew didn't watch this from afar. She actually joined the fight. She and her crew crossed 500 miles of mountainous terrain under RAF bombardment on foot to shoot the footage that they ended up with.
فلا يمكن أني أحتقر نفسي لهؤلاء هذا الشلة حتى تصبح هي مسيطرة علي. أنا باستطاعتي أنا أدفع بنفسي للأمام وأقتحم هذه الحواجز اللي هم دايرين علي الكل وأطور نفسي وألتحق بالثورة لكي أشارك في كافة الأعمال الثوري.
What makes this documentary extraordinary and a classic example of militant or third cinema is its participatory spirit. Surur's camera throughout gives voice to the women and girls in particular, and the fighters in general themselves. And this is quite different from how a lot of European documentary techniques work. You often, in that case, get a kind of voice of God narrative in the background as a voiceover that is explaining what we see on camera. Surur's film does not do that at any point. Next, just 4 years later, in 1978, we got another wonderful documentary from the Western Sahara. So you may recall I have already mentioned Med Hondo, the Mauritanian filmmaker, in one of my previous videos. Back then, we had spoken about his groundbreaking O Sun. This time, I'm focusing on his film Polisario, A People in Arms. And this is another classic example of third cinema, where Hondo documents the Sahrawi people's struggle for liberation. First, from Spanish colonial occupation, and then later from the Moroccan nation state. The Polisario Front, the name of this liberation movement, was battling for self-determination in a desert homeland that had been torn apart by imperial politics. In Polisario, Hondo's camera becomes both an archive and a weapon. Watching it today reminds us that decolonization wasn't just a historical event that took place throughout the world in the 20th century. It was also a series of processes that were about reclaiming the power to define oneself, to speak, and to assert one's future direction. Now, our third documentary may surprise you because it is set as recent as 2014. You may well say, well, were there any anti-colonial struggles going on as late as the 2010s? Well, the Sudanese activist and director Hajooj Kuka's Beats of the Antonov show us that colonialism did not necessarily end with the raising of flags. The topic of Beats of the Antonov isn't a struggle against a European occupier, but against what is often called internal colonialism. This speaks to how post-independence governments sometimes ended up reproducing the hierarchies and violent practices of the former colonizer that had bequeathed them the rule in that country. In Sudan, the central government in Khartoum has long oppressed the Nuba people in the south, targeting them in the 2010s with bombings using Antonov planes, the same ones that give the film its title. But Kuka doesn't only show war, he shows life. People singing, dancing, and making music even as bombs fall. For them, culture is resistance. The music of the Nuba people in this documentary serves almost as a declaration against the government in Khartoum, saying, we are here and we're not going anywhere. I actually interviewed Kuka himself over Zoom back in 2014, and I was especially struck by how he explained the filming process went. He said he lived among the Nuba people whilst he was making the film, so he wasn't an outsider. He also described how during the wet season the fighting would have to stop because the cars could not get through the roads. So for half the year, what he would do is host drama workshops and theater-related activities with the community, producing short films that were just for themselves. And then when the dry season arrived and the resistance could start up again, that is when he would capture the footage that eventually made it into his final documentary. This kind of immersion is in the spirit of what Sembène called cinema as our night school. Film as education, survival, and self-expression, which does not exclude the actual director, who themselves actually learn from being embedded in the lives of their subjects. All three of these documentaries share something vital. They break what is sometimes called the colonial gaze. For centuries, films made under colonial rule portrayed non-European peoples as objects to be studied, managed, or pitied. These filmmakers and many others reversed the lens. Their work continues to remind us that political liberation isn't just about changing who rules who, but it's also about changing how we see. So as long as filmmakers continue to tell stories from the ground up and with rather than about people, the night school of cinema stays open. That's it from me for today. Thank you so much for watching The Global Gaze and for bearing with me while the sun sets remarkably fast in the UK right now. What do you think? Do you think that a director needs to have a kind of bird's eye view over their subject matter? Or would you like to see more films where the film crew actually embeds themselves within the people that they're looking at? Two very different approaches with two different results, but the latter is the one that truly gave us a wonderful archive of film about the way that people won their liberation. Please don't forget to subscribe and like this video and turn on your notifications so you can see all of my new content show up directly on your main feed. Thank you for watching and Happy New Year, and keep your gaze global.